What happens as we inspiring and shocking.
Very warm welcome to everybody to the fourth and last event of this season of the series Expressions of Humanity. Our objective is to talk about important human rights issues of our times so that we are more aware, informed, and maybe inspired to action. And how do we do this? Through arts and through inspiring stories.
I want to say this was a topic that was close to my heart as someone who grew up in southern Alberta, close to the largest First Nations reserve in Canada, and having spent much time with the peoples. It was disappointing for me to discover that there were so many things that I did not know about the culture and about the things that were happening across the years. So I think this is an important time for awareness for all of us. I think it's particularly in Europe something that people have not heard of before and have not seen. So I hope you take the opportunity to listen. We are very timely at Time for Equality. We had not decided on this event knowing exactly when the Canadian Commission on the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women would complete their work, but approximately June 3rd, they issued a report with over 200 recommendations. We will not go through the 200 recommendations, but it's to show that today stories are being told, and you cannot have change unless there is an awareness. So the first step to awareness is understanding the truths. At this point, I would like to hand the mic over to our ambassador, His Excellency Olivier Nikolov.
Thank you, Karen. Well, thank you all for being here today. This is a great initiative. There's one big event in the international diplomatic community. It's the UN General Assembly. It's in September. It's the occasion to listen to all the presidents, prime ministers, whoever of importance is in this world. It's the moment of diplomacy every year. So I want to read to you a few excerpts from Prime Minister Trudeau. He was there in September of 2017, so the second year he's been in power. He's addressing this large gathering of head of states, government, this big diplomatic moment, biggest of the year. And this is what he said, talking obviously about Canada. We are a country built on different cultures, different religions, all coming together. That diversity has become our strength. But that is not, and has not always been true for everyone who shares our land. Canada is built on the ancestral land of the Indigenous peoples, but regrettably, it's also a country that came into being without the meaningful participation of those who were there first. And even where treaties had been formed to provide a foundation for proper relations, they have not been fully honored or implemented. For First Nations, Métis Nations, and Inuit peoples in Canada, those early colonial relationships were not about strength through diversity or a celebration of our differences. For Indigenous peoples in Canada, the experience was mostly one of humiliation, neglect, and abuse. Of a government that didn't respect their traditions and strength, or their distinct government and laws, but instead denied and undermined their rights and their dignity. That sought to overwrite their distinct histories, to eradicate their distinct languages and cultures, and to impose colonial traditions and way of life. And he went on, The failure of successive Canadian governments to respect the rights of Indigenous people in Canada is our great shame. And for many Indigenous people, this lack of respect for their rights persists to this day. I think almost all his speech was about the still very tough conditions faced by the Indigenous population of Canada. So, what does that tell us? I mean, I will not get into what Mr. Trudeau's thinking is, or try to interpret that. But he chose to spend that moment of international recognition when he was really under the international spotlight to mention in very, very clear terms that we've got a problem in Canada. There is a dark page in our history. Personally, I found that absolutely remarkable. And as a diplomat, when I'm, for example, raising issues, you know, I was posted to Russia. I've been in several African countries where human rights, it's a real issue, it's a real problem. When I'm raising issues like that, we're not doing that in Luxembourg, we're working together on this, but in other countries, when I'm raising that, I can now say, you know, we're not here to give lessons. We're here because human rights are fundamental rights that must be respected, protected, promoted. And yes, we in Canada, we have a dark page in our history, but we are fully committed to address the challenges. And for me, the beginning of addressing this situation is to know what has happened, and also as Canadian to understand how the Indigenous culture and traditions have made what Canada is today. It is so much part of our identity and existence today. So I'm really glad that you've come here to also listen and discover a bit more about Canada. Again, the first thing to do is to listen and to know what has happened and what we can do today to try to redress this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your clear position. We're now going to move to our keynote speaker, who's spent several hours traveling here on plane, train, bus. She's been diligent in getting here because she has a story that's worth hearing. Our guest is Linda K. Peters, and I will allow her to tell you her real name and why it was shortened to K. She is a very active individual in the Seabird Island First Nations band. Her goal is to make a difference by bringing the culture back to life and using the culture to change the dynamics of violence and abuse, and also just the overall well-being of the people. Herself, she is noted for, as you've walked in, you've probably seen some of the designs, a very gifted and talented designer, fashion designer. And she most recently showed her designs at the International Indigenous Fashion Show in Paris. So we are very honored and we'd like to welcome you. Thank you for being here.
Everybody. And thank you very much for coming and hearing what I have to say and listening to what we're going to be sharing later. My native name is Linda K-Siwesima. It originally is Cree. It means person who rings bell. And that's my native name that we were born with. But they shortened our name to K because I couldn't pronounce K-Siwesima. So that's where the Lynn K. Peters comes from. At some point, I will probably reuse my original name. I come from Eastern Canada, as Karen has mentioned. I now reside in Hope, British Columbia. I'm here with my granddaughter, and I also brought another lady with me. Her native name is Heather Across the Mountain. Her English name is Heather Lewis, and she is modeled for me before. and she's also a jingle dress dancer. We will talk about the jingle dress, and she's going to come out and do a couple dance demonstrations for you. Traditionally, our people spoke from the heart. We didn't use cards like these, but I'm still learning. I'm still an elder in training. So just bear with me. There are some points I just didn't want to forget, so I made notes. In Canada, we're the original people of the lands till the settlers came. And then we lost most of our land. The reservation system was put in place, and we had to stay there. And we needed permission to leave. And if you didn't return after your shopping trip or whatever, they came looking for you. The Indian agent came looking for you and brought you back to the reserve. My grandmother remembers that story. They don't do that any longer, but my grandmother remembered that. Alcohol was introduced to our First Nations people, which had a devastating effect on our people. It created a lot of family breakdown, loss of identity. Our people didn't know who they were. They didn't know how to speak their language. They didn't know their culture. They didn't know who they are. And the residential school as well. It took all the children away from the parents. Some at the age of 4, up until 16 or 18 years old. They were only allowed to go home maybe once a year. So, needless to say, the family unit was broke down, and the children didn't know the parents didn't know the children, and lots of times the kids never even went home after they got out of residential school. The residential schools are all closed now, and the last one closed in 1994. So during that time, we weren't allowed to practice our culture. We weren't allowed to speak our language. Most of us don't know how to speak our language. I can say some words. I can't speak fluent, but when I'm in my community, I can understand topics and things like that, but I'm not a fluent speaker. My parents both knew how to speak. My dad could speak Cree, my mom could speak Ojibwe. But because of the town that I grew up in, there was a lot of racism. And so I think my dad didn't teach us how to speak because he wanted us to fit in to the public school system. Murdered and missing Indigenous women, it's an issue that's been going on for not 3 decades, but a long time, 100 years maybe. I remember as a child, I grew up in a small northern mining community. There were 6 operating mines and very few Native people. The Canadian government has been saying for the last few years that there's 1,200 missing and murdered Indigenous women. But the First Nations Women's Association, National Women's Association, have always known it's been more around 4,000 women that have been missing within the last 3 decades. And with the national report that just came out on June the 3rd, what was in that report is over 4,000 women. Growing up in my community, there was a lot of racism, a lot of non-Native people, there was a lot of minors, there was a lot of no value placed on the Native people at all. One of the main reasons I got involved with murdered and missing Indigenous women is to help share some of their stories, because a lot of times nobody knew what happened to them. They had no voice. And my mom was one of those women. I remember at the age of 8 or 9 that something bad had happened to her, but she never told me the story until I was an adult, so I didn't know. Her and my dad went out for the evening, and they got separated from each other, and she decided to walk home by herself. It was common in our hometown for the men to drive around and try to pick up Native women. She got drove into a car, and she was taken to an isolated road, and she was beaten and raped and left to die and thrown in a bush. Nothing ever happened to those men. And my mom never reported it because anytime anything like that has been reported, nothing was ever done. And so my main reason for being involved with the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women is to tell my mom's story. I want people to know. That what she went through wasn't, somebody cares. At that time, it seemed like nobody cared. She's alive today. She survived her ordeal. She's 95 years old. So I want to be her voice, and I want to share her story whenever I can. Also last summer, I had a niece that went missing in July. We did a lot of searches. Our family searched the highways, we searched the river. We did 3 highway searches and 2 river searches. We didn't get much help from the local professionals, the RCMP, the Hope Search and Rescue. We basically did it ourselves. Our family walked up and down the highway, and we got our own boats and we drove up and down the highway searching for her. It wasn't until the very end when some of our leadership, our higher First Nations leadership, got on board and decided to talk to the superintendent of the RCMP that we actually did get some help. She was found in November in the river, 200 miles from where she disappeared. So she'd been in the river for 4 months. The RCMPs say there was no foul play. I'm not sure how they determined that, because we don't know how she got in the river. It's quite common for a lot of our women to end up in the river. There was a young girl from Winnipeg, Manitoba, 15 years old, little Tina Fontaine, that ended up in a bag in the river. And the person that was accused of her murder got away. He didn't get charged for anything. He went to court, but nothing happened. And this is common. It happens quite often. It happened when I was 8, 9 years old. My niece went missing last year. It's still happening. So that's one of the reasons you'll see lots of organized events for awareness for murdered and missing Indigenous women, because we're trying to stop it, we're trying to change it. A lot of my fashion shows that I do to help create awareness wherever I go. Things are changing though. Our people are getting more educated. There was a time we weren't allowed to be educated, or we lost our status as a Native person. We have little cards that tell us we're Native. We actually expire every 5 years, which is kind of silly. So, as I was mentioning, things are changing though, so we don't lose our status now if we get educated. My niece just graduated last week with her master's in linguistics. My nephew is going to college now to become a nurse. I have two nieces that are teachers. So things are changing because we're out there to change things in any way that we can. We've had to relearn our culture. This was in 1985 that I figured out that I'm a Native person and I live like a non-Native person. I don't know how to speak my language, I don't know my cultural practices, I didn't know anything. I have brown skin, but that's about it. It hurt me to realize that I didn't know anything about being a Native person. And it was an elder that kind of brought that to my attention. I got reprimanded for not knowing certain things that I should have known as a Native person. I made it my purpose from that time on to work exclusively for my people and to start learning about my own culture. I sing and I drum and I dance, jingle and traditional now, and I'm trying to pass whatever I do know on to my children and my grandchildren. You'll meet my granddaughter in a bit. But it's been a hard road, but we're resilient people. We're forging ahead. We're revising our practices. I had a naming for my son a couple of years ago. In our native ways, you can pass your Indian name on to your child. And when we have these ceremonies, they're really heartfelt to me, because they're things that make me proud. We invited some Cree medicine people to come and do the ceremony, and we had it out in the field in BC. We had a teepee there, we had a medicine man, and my son was sitting on a buffalo robe in front of the teepee, and in one hand he had an eagle feather, and in the other hand he had a blade of sweetgrass, which is one of our medicines. He was sitting there on that buffalo robe with his legs crossed, receiving his native name. That was probably one of the most touching things that has ever happened, and I'm very proud that he carries my dad's native name. So we're carrying on with our ceremonies and sweats, and we have language classes. We're trying to continue to keep our languages alive. We have quite a few languages all across Canada, and everybody across Canada is trying to continue to learn their language and learn their culture. You know, we have powwows. I'm not sure if you know what a powwow is, but it's a gathering where we all get together and we celebrate. We have all different types of dance, and we dance for 2 or 3 days, sometimes all night long. You know, it's a source of pride for us, and it's a rebuilding of us as a people. We also go out and pick our own traditional foods. We gather our own medicines. We hunt, we fish, we trap. We're healing through a lot of our cultural practices. And one of the dances that you're going to see is called the jingle dress dance. It's a healing dance. This dress here, I made in memory of my dad. This dress is 18 years old. I had wanted to dance for him before he passed away, because he had cancer, and they told us that he had 4 months to live. He wanted to go back to his old cultural practices, and he didn't want to go on chemotherapy. So we brought in all the kind of medicines that we could, and he stayed with us for a full year just on the medicines. I started making this dress when he passed away, and I danced in this dress on the 1-year anniversary of his passing. It's made of jingles, and there's 367 jingles on this dress. One for every day of the year, and one for me, and one for him. When he passed away, we made his own casket. He didn't want us to spend, I don't know what it is, 5,000 or 6,000 or something for a casket. He didn't want that, so we built it. We built his casket for him. We painted a white buffalo on his casket. He also owned a pipe, and there's the pipe there. And in his casket, we put an eagle feather in his hand, so that represents the eagle feather. His favorite color was blue, so this is the blue representing my dad. And the colors were colors that just came to me. And usually when you're making your jingle dress, they're colors that will come to you through passed on to family, or sometimes you'll dream or have a vision of your colors. So these were my colors. So this is the healing dress, and you need to pray for somebody when you're dancing. Somebody will come to you and they will give you some medicine. Usually it's tobacco, because tobacco is one of our medicines. We have 4 main medicines, which is tobacco, sweetgrass, sage, and cedar. And so when somebody offers you some tobacco and wants you to pray for one of their family members, you take that tobacco and you dance with your jingle dress. That's your responsibility as a jingle dress dancer.
This dress here is a family dress. I made this for my niece to dance in. And then it went on to my granddaughter, my older granddaughter. And then my youngest granddaughter, who will be coming out, wore this as well. And I'm also a great kukum. I'm a great grandma. So my great granddaughter is a year old, and she will wear this dress. This is my granddaughter, Caitlin Peters. I love her very much, and I'm so proud of her for doing this and coming with me on this journey. This is a dress that I made, and the symbols on there are hummingbird wings. Every time I make different outfits, they'll have some sort of a native design on it that represents us or our people. You okay, my girl? She's 16 years old. She's in grade 11. She'll be graduating next year. Now we're going to have Heather do a jingle dress dance demonstration.
The healing dance. Oh, it's the straight. There's the straight, and then there's also the side step that I'll be doing next.
So she's going to come back and she's going to do a different style. It'll be jingle dress, but just a different style. This dress here is a halter dress I made, and all of the feathers on it represent eagle feathers. I like to put native symbols of some sort on all of my clothing. And the earrings that she's wearing are earrings made in honor of murdered and missing Indigenous women. They're the red dresses. And you'll see a lot of people are wearing them nowadays to create awareness for murdered and missing Indigenous women. Okay, thank you, my girl. Thank you very much, Heather. Heather made this dress, what, 2 weeks ago? Just 2 weeks ago, especially to come here. And her purse, and her moccasins, and her ties. These are otter ties. A lot of our women wear otter ties on their regalia. So, you know, this is how we're healing ourselves. We're going back to our culture because that's what gives us pride. And that's what's going to heal us so we can continue to carry on, passing on our culture to our people. I have one more dress. This is a special dress for me. It's called my teepee dress. And it's in honor of murdered and missing Indigenous women. You see the women on the front and the back. You'll see some kneeling down. Some represent children crying because they lost their mom. Some are sisters that are no longer together. The whole dress is representative of a teepee. This is the door here with an opening. And it's something that I really wanted to create more awareness for murdered and missing Indigenous women. Here you'll see this woman is walking away. She gets smaller and disappears. We're still looking for our women. You can walk around.
No.
Caitlin, you can sit down. I want to thank you all very much for coming here and listening to what we had to say and what we had to share.
I was just saying to Lynn, thank you very much for sharing your personal stories that are so close to you. And you'll see that she now has her eagle feather in her hand, which is for strength. And she told all of those stories without it. So she's a very brave woman. And sharing your stories were difficult stories, but we thank you very much. We are sitting in a circle today because the tradition of the First Nations is that the circle is representative of life. It is the circle of life, it is the circle of the seasons. It is within the circle that the community gets together and connects and discusses. So today, it's now your chance to be part of that circle and to ask any questions that you might have of Lynn.
With the jingle dress, the actual cone, does that represent something in particular? You mentioned those on the tribute to your father were the days of the year, including then the two children. Does it always represent something, or is it just there to create the noise for the dance?
There is a legend behind the jingle dress that has been passed on to us. There's different variations of the story. The one that I had been told was that a granddaughter was very, very sick, a young child, and the grandfather was very worried for her. And so he prayed. He would pray every night. And on one of those nights, he had a vision, a dress that made noises like the sound of rain. And so he made a dress for his granddaughter out of little jingles. I believe they might have been deer hoofs, I think, at that time. Little horns that jingled. They made sounds. So he made this dress for his granddaughter. And he was told in his vision and his dream she needed to dance in that dress. So the first time that she went out, she couldn't walk on her own. She had to be held up. The second round, she got a bit stronger. And the third round, she was able to dance on their own. And so that's where the healing dress legend has come from. And as I mentioned earlier, when you wear a jingle dress, you have a responsibility to dance and pray for people for their health. And that's what we do now.
Any other questions? Well, maybe Lynn will give you a little bit of a break, and maybe there'll be some more questions come up as we speak to our next individuals. By chance, when we put out that we were doing the activity on Indigenous women in Canada, we were contacted by a film company that is a social impact company that is doing a film called Ghost Dancer. But if I could ask directors and producers to come up and maybe give us a short introduction and to show you that it is possible to act in Luxembourg and touch on the issue of Canada and why you decided this topic. I'll give you the floor to you.
Yes, we are social impact filmmaker. It means we are not doing only films, but our films are the art of what we call the transmedia. So we are also changing laws. We are trying to educate people about a very hard topic. For example, we did our last movie about sexual violence in war zone.
On each project we are working on, we build a transmedia project, which means we have different kind of media. I mean, feature film, digital campaign, we create application, we create a music album, we create, I don't know, different kind of media to raise awareness about different kind of social topics. We wanted to work on the feminicide. So you know, feminicide is when women are killed because they are women. And we wanted to create a transmedia project about this topic. And that's how started the Ghost Dance project. And the first step of the project was to speak about feminicide all over the world. We can speak about feminicide here in Luxembourg, in France, in Germany, we can go in Africa, and of course in America. So in this project we are creating a digital campaign to work on this feminicide topic through dance, through storytelling, through cinema. So that's the main part of the project. It was for us an evidence to speak about the First Nation women in Canada. I think your fight is the story I want to tell to my daughter. And that's why we started to work on this project. So maybe we can give you more details about this project.
It's a co-production between Luxembourg and Canada. We work with a filmmaker, Abenaki origin, Kim Obansawin. We write the film together, and we will direct the film together also. And here you can see some artistic direction of the movie. It's made by Sage Mukash. She is a Cree from the north of Quebec, and she's a very talented artist, and we will work with her to make this movie together.
So more about the movie, if you want. I will read the resume of the film. Preparing to audition for a prestigious dance school, Migis, a native teenager, accidentally causes the spirit of a faceless young woman to appear. As you can see, it's an animated feature film, and especially the co-production is made with our company and a First Nation production company in Quebec, in Montreal. So the story is the story of a teenager. One day she met a faceless young woman, and she decided to help her to recover her identity. And during this journey, our young teenager will rediscover her own identity, her own family history, and of course the missing and murdered First Nation woman.
And so through the Canadian story from this young teenager, we want also to speak about patriarchy, feminicide all around the world. And yes, First Nation women are the inspiration of all this movement, as just said Nicolas, because yes, your fight has to be elevated as an example for all the women around the world. And that's the goal of this film. Women who are fighting for their rights, because for now our daughter has not the same rights as our boy. it's not acceptable. We have to fight for this.
Thank you. Well, I feel surrounded by very inspiring people. I'm sure you do too. It's a wonderful initiative, and by Lynn's story and Caitlin and Heather, I think there is a strong story to be told. And they are going to end with a song that you would probably appreciate because it is about strong women, a couple of different songs. I will hand it over to our strong women.
We're going to sing the Strong Woman's Song, which is a song out of British Columbia. After that, going to sing another song that we were just practicing this morning. So if we mess up a little bit, maybe you'll... but it sounded good in the apartment, so... The first one was the Strong Woman's Song, no, the Women's Warrior Song. This one here is the Strong Woman's Song, and this one is from Eastern Canada, originates out of the Ojibwe women.
That was a great yin.
very much. It's the team that makes the difference, and it's with all of our efforts together, again, the collective and the community, as we learned, are very important, and that's how we'll make a difference. Thank you, and see you next time.